The sky over the Atlantic darkens. Two colossal fleets, 33 French and Spanish warships against 27 British, drift toward each other like predators circling. On the deck of the HMS Victory, Admiral Horatio Nelson raises his spyglass. The sea wind cuts through his coat, but his eyes burn with certainty. England expects that every man will do his duty. Moments later, the horizon erupts in fire. Cannons roar, masts splinter, men cry out. And at the center of it all, one man who will die, but win eternal glory. This is not just history. This is Trafalgar, seen as if you were there. If you've never been here before, you're right on time. Hit subscribe, and let's uncover what was buried. The world before Trafalgar. The year is 1805. Europe is not a continent at peace. It is a battlefield that stretches from the frozen steppes of Russia to the rolling hills of Spain. And at the center of it all stands one man, Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor. Napoleon has crushed almost every army sent against him. The Austrians, the Prussians, the Italians, all bent or broken under his genius for war. On land, he seems invincible. But there is one enemy he cannot reach, one thorn that keeps pricking his side: Britain. The island fortress, protected not by walls but by the Royal Navy, stands in his way. Napoleon knows that if he can land his grand army on English soil, he could end centuries of rivalry in a single stroke. But between him and London lies the English Channel, narrow, yet impossible to cross without control of the sea. This is where the story of Trafalgar truly begins, not on the waves, but in the corridors of power, in Napoleon's mind. His plan is bold: to draw the British fleet away, unite his French and Spanish allies, and smash the Royal Navy in a single, decisive battle. Yet across the Channel, another mind is waiting for him. A man of one arm, one eye, and an unbreakable spirit: Horatio Nelson. Nelson understands something Napoleon never fully grasps, that Britain's survival depends not on armies, but on ships. And Nelson is determined to make sure that no French soldier ever sets foot on English soil. But before Nelson can strike, Europe trembles under Napoleon's shadow. In Paris, maps are spread across tables. In Brest and Toulon, French ships prepare for war. In Cadiz, the Spanish armada stirs. The world is holding its breath. And in London, the people whisper a single question: when will the French come? The scene is set. The two greatest commanders of their age, Napoleon on land, Nelson at sea, are on a collision course. But no one yet knows that one of them will not live to see the dawn after Trafalgar. Nelson's shadow. Before Trafalgar, before immortality, there was just Horatio. He was not born into greatness. Unlike many naval commanders of his time, Nelson was not the son of an admiral or a wealthy patron. He was the son of a country parson in Norfolk, frail in body, often ill, and destined, it seemed, for a small, quiet life. But the sea called him early. At the age of 12, a boy barely taller than a ship's cannon, Nelson entered the Navy. He was seasick, weak, and often ridiculed by stronger boys. Yet he had something they didn't: a fire inside him that would not be put out. The sea made him, but it also broke him. At Calvi in Corsica, he lost the sight in his right eye. Years later, in battle against the Spanish at Tenerife, he lost his right arm. Most men would have retired, defeated. Nelson refused. "I am left-handed now," he joked after his arm was amputated. And then he returned to war. These wounds shaped more than his body. They shaped his soul. Nelson became a man who believed he was chosen for something greater, a man who walked with destiny like a shadow. His sailors felt it too. He was no distant admiral barking orders from safety. Nelson lived among his men, spoke with them, laughed with them. They called him our Nelson. But there was another side, a man of contradictions. Ambitious to the point of obsession. A master of strategy who also followed his heart recklessly, famously falling in love with Lady Emma Hamilton in a scandal that shook polite society. Nelson didn't care. He cared only for two things: glory and Britain. By 1805, Nelson was already a legend. At the Battle of the Nile in 1798, He had shattered Napoleon's fleet in Egypt, trapping the French army far from home. At Copenhagen in 1801, he had defied orders, literally putting his telescope to his blind eye so he could not see a signal to retreat, and turning potential defeat into triumph. These victories made him both feared and adored. To Napoleon, Nelson was a ghost who haunted the seas. To Britain, he was their shield, their lion, their last hope. But there was something else, something darker. Nelson knew that his life was being written as if by some unseen hand, and he believed that destiny would claim him in battle. He knew he was not meant to live long. So when whispers reached him in 1805 that the French and Spanish fleets were gathering, that a decisive clash was coming, Nelson did not hesitate. He knew where his story would end. And yet he smiled, because Nelson was not afraid of death. He was afraid of dying without victory. The fleets are preparing. Napoleon's trap is closing. Nelson is heading for his final act. Napoleon's gamble. 1805, Europe trembled under one name, Napoleon Bonaparte. The Corsican who crowned himself emperor had done the impossible. He crushed Austria, humbled Prussia, and threatened to erase centuries of monarchies with a single stroke of ambition. His armies marched like thunder across the continent. Yet for all his victories on land, there was one frontier he could not cross: the sea. Britain stood alone, an island nation that refused to bend, protected not by walls or alliances, but by its navy. Napoleon knew that if he could not defeat the Royal Navy, he could never conquer Britain. And so, he crafted a bold gamble. The plan was audacious. French fleets from Toulon, Rochefort, and Brest would slip past British blockades, rendezvous in the Caribbean, then sweep back across the Atlantic, join with the Spanish fleet, and finally bring overwhelming force into the English Channel. There, under the guns of Napoleon's army massed up alone, the invasion of Britain would begin. Imagine the vision: 150,000 French troops, veterans of Austerlitz and Marengo, packed into flat-bottomed boats, crossing the narrow strait. Napoleon himself leading them ashore. London falling. The end of Britain's independence. The end of its empire before it even truly began. But there was a problem. One name: Nelson. Napoleon feared him. He called the Royal Navy the only thing between me and world empire. Nelson, though wounded and frail, had turned the Navy into a living wall around Britain. Wherever Napoleon's fleets tried to move, Nelson's shadow followed. Still, Napoleon believed his plan would work. In Paris, his marshals urged caution, but the emperor's confidence was unshakable. He had beaten every general on land. He believed the sea would be no different. What he didn't understand was this: land and sea are different worlds. On land, men march, terrain matters, armies bend but regroup. At sea, one moment of hesitation, one wrong signal, one gust of wind, and an empire can sink in minutes. Meanwhile, the combined French and Spanish fleets gathered under Admiral Villeneuve, a man Napoleon distrusted but could not replace. Villeneuve was no Nelson. He was hesitant, cautious, and above all, haunted by the legend of the one-eyed, one-armed admiral who never lost. By October 1805, fate drew the fleets together. The French and Spanish anchored at Cadiz, desperate, weary, but under orders to sail. Nelson, with 27 ships of the line, moved to intercept. Outnumbered, outgunned, yet fearless. Napoleon's gamble was about to be tested, and Trafalgar would decide everything. Two fleets are now within reach. Nelson knows he's outnumbered. Villeneuve knows he's outclassed. The storm is about to break. The calm before the storm. October 20th, 1805. The Bay of Cadiz lies quiet. Spanish villages wake to the smell of salt and tar. Fishermen mend their nets, and far on the horizon, two navies prepare for destiny. On the flagship HMS Victory, the air is strangely still. Nelson paces the quarterdeck slowly, his single eye fixed on the horizon. He is weary, years of service, wounds that never healed, the constant pain in his chest. And yet, he is alive in this moment, sharper than ever. Around him, sailors murmur softly, polishing cannons, coiling ropes, adjusting sails. They know. Every man knows. Tomorrow may be their last sunrise. Victory herself creaks and groans like an old warrior, 104 guns of oak and iron, scarred by storms and battles, yet majestic. The flagship of Britain's last defense. Nelson's officers gather close. Vice Admiral Collingwood, steady and calm, his oldest friend. Captain Hardy, loyal and unshakable. They exchange few words, but the silence is heavy with meaning. Nelson speaks at last. Something must be left to chance. Great things must be dared. It is his philosophy, to fight with boldness, to strike with such ferocity that hesitation has no place. Tomorrow, he will not line his ships in the old-fashioned way, trading broadsides and long, bloody stalemates.
No.
Nelson will do the unthinkable. He will split the enemy fleet in two. He will sail directly at them, head-on. He will shatter their line, and in doing so, shatter Napoleon's dream of conquest. It is madness. It is genius. And it is pure Nelson. As dusk falls, Nelson writes a final prayer in his private journal. His hand trembles, the ink blots, but his words are steady. May humanity after victory be the predominant feature in the British fleet. It is not blood he seeks, but honor. He knows the price of war. He knows too well. Then comes a softer moment. He writes a letter to Lady Emma Hamilton, the woman he loves, the one who will never truly be his. He asks her to care for his daughter if he does not return. It is tender, almost fragile, the voice of a man, not a legend. Night deepens. The crews rest where they can, hammocks swaying, lanterns dim. But no one truly sleeps. Some pray.
Some drink.
Some sharpen cutlasses and whisper about home. In Cadiz, the French and Spanish prepare as well. Admiral Villeneuve knows he must sail. Napoleon's orders are clear. Yet his heart is heavy.
He fears Nelson.
He fears tomorrow. His captains sense it. Doubt spreads like smoke through their fleet. Two worlds, one night apart. And then, as dawn approaches, the lookout on Victory's mast shouts the words that will echo forever. Enemy in sight. The fleets are now on the move. Nelson is about to raise his signal, the words that will stir Britain for centuries. Nelson's signal. England expects. Morning, October 21st, 1805. The sea is restless. A pale sun rises over the Atlantic, glinting on hundreds of sails stretched across the horizon. The enemy has formed their line, 33 ships of the line, French and Spanish, stretching in a jagged crescent, their black gun ports open like a mouth full of teeth. It is a wall of wood, iron, and firepower. The combined fleet outnumbers Nelson. But Nelson has no fear. His plan is already in motion. On the deck of Victory, flags are prepared. The halyards whip in the breeze. The sailors know something historic is about to happen. They cluster near the masts, watching the signalmen. At 11:45 a.m., Nelson gives the order. The signal flags rise, one by one, climbing the rigging until they dance against the sky. The message unfurls. England expects that every man will do his duty. Not the king expects. Not I expect. But England itself. It is the nation speaking through Nelson. A call to honor, to courage, to sacrifice. A cheer erupts across the fleet. Men roar, clap, beat the gunwales with their fists. The words sweep from ship to ship like fire on the wind. Sailors weep, laugh, shout. God save Nelson. The signal becomes more than flags, it becomes spirit. On French decks, the mood is different. Villeneuve watches through his glass, uncertain. His officers argue, his men shift nervously. They see the British ships, not forming a defensive wall, but advancing in two daring columns, cutting across the waves like blades. It is madness. To sail head-on into a storm of cannon fire. To expose your bow, your weakest point, to the enemy's broadsides. And yet, Nelson presses forward. Steady, he tells Hardy. Steer for their center. On deck, the air is tense. Drums beat. Marines load muskets. Cannons stand ready, their crews stripped to the waist, sweating in the cool wind. Powder monkeys, boys no older than 12, clutch cartridges, waiting for the first blast. Nelson walks the deck slowly, calm as if strolling a garden. He calls to his men, speaking not like an admiral to sailors, but like a friend to brothers. This will be a great victory. Every man here will do his duty. The men cheer again, louder this time. Then Nelson turns to Hardy, and his voice softens. I have always made it a rule to serve faithfully. God bless you, Hardy. The two men clasp hands, a silent farewell hidden in the noise of war. The enemy looms closer. The French guns are trained, their crews ready to unleash hell. The first broadsides are about to thunder. Victory's timbers groan as she cuts through the waves, leading the charge. Behind her, Collingwood in the Royal Sovereign steers straight for the enemy line as well. 2 columns, 2 spears aimed at the heart of Napoleon's fleet. The trap is set. The distance closes. The first shot will change the fate of empires. The guns are about to roar, and Nelson will soon be under fire. The clash of broadsides. The silence before battle is a cruel trick. The only sounds now are the creak of rigging, the snap of sails, and the rush of waves against oak hulls. Then,
Boom.
a French ship fires first. A single shot, then a volley. The sky cracks with smoke and flame as the Redoutable, the Bucentaur, and others unleash their opening broadsides. Cannonballs whistle through the air. Splinters the size of daggers burst from shattered planks, cutting men down like scythes through wheat. Masts shudder, canvas rips, screams mix with thunder. The Victory surges forward, undaunted. She takes the punishment, her bow crashing through the hail of iron. But Nelson had planned this. By piercing the enemy line, he would trap them in chaos. Then,
Crunch.
Victory rams into the French ship Redoutable. The impact shakes both vessels like an earthquake. Gun ports are almost muzzle to muzzle now. Sailors can see the whites of enemy eyes, hear the shouts in French and Spanish. Nelson raises his hand. Fire. The broadside erupts. 40 cannons explode at once, hurling iron into the enemy at point-blank range. Decks splinter. Men are hurled into the sea. The Redoutable staggers under the punishment. Smoke rolls across the water. Ships vanish into gray clouds lit only by flashes of cannon fire. The roar is constant now, a storm of iron and fire. On Victory's gun decks, chaos reigns. Gun crews load and fire with mechanical fury, sweat and powder caking their faces. Powder monkeys dart back and forth, shells of boys moving between fire-belching monsters. Every cannon blast rocks the ship, filling the air with choking smoke. Above deck, sharpshooters in the rigging of the Redoutable pick out officers. They take aim at Nelson himself, standing tall in his admiral's coat, refusing to hide, refusing to kneel. French Marines pour musket fire across the narrow gap. British Marines return volley from Victory's deck. The space between ships becomes a slaughterhouse, filled with lead, flame, and splinters. On the other side of the line, Collingwood's Royal Sovereign tears through the Spanish flagship Santa Ana, blasting broadside after broadside into her hull. The Spanish stagger under the punishment, but they fight with desperate bravery. The entire bay becomes a cauldron. Ships locked together. Cannons thundering. Men leaping across decks with cutlasses and pistols. Smoke so thick that even officers can't tell friend from foe until the wind shifts. In the midst of it all, Nelson walks the deck as though in another world, unflinching, steady, inspiring. Every man fights harder because he is there. But high in the rigging of the Redoutable, a French sharpshooter steadies his musket. The barrel points down. The sight rests on Nelson's shoulder. The fate of an empire is hanging by a trigger. The musket is aimed at Nelson. The fatal shot. The smoke drifts, parting for just a moment. On the deck of the Victory, Nelson is visible, his small frame unmistakable beneath the gold-braided admiral's coat. He's pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, calm in the storm. He refuses to crouch, refuses to take cover. To Nelson, Hiding from musket fire would send the wrong message to his men. If they see him unafraid, they will stand unafraid. But in the rigging of the French ship Redoutable, a sharpshooter waits. Powder horn ready, musket primed. He peers down the long barrel, sight locked on Nelson. The Frenchman's breath slows. His finger curls.
Crack.
The musket erupts. Nelson staggers. His knees buckle. He collapses onto the deck, his sword clattering against the planks. "They have done for me at last," he whispers. The ball has torn through his shoulder, piercing his lung, cutting downward toward his spine. Instantly, those nearby know, this is mortal. Captain Hardy rushes to him, horror in his eyes. Sailors gather, carrying their admiral below deck, through the thunder of cannon fire, through smoke and chaos. They lay him on a makeshift bed in the dim, crowded orlop deck, where the ship's surgeon tends to the wounded. But even as life slips away, Nelson's mind clings to the battle above. "How goes the fight?" he asks, over and over, his voice rasping, his breath short. Above deck, the fight rages harder. Victory and Redoutable remain locked together, exchanging fire so close the ships seem welded by flame. On the other side, Collingwood's Royal Sovereign pounds the Spanish Santa Ana into submission. One by one, French and Spanish ships begin to falter, surrendering as their lines collapse. Below, Hardy finally returns to Nelson's side, powder-stained and grim. "It is well, my lord. The day is ours." A faint smile crosses Nelson's face. His last words are not of pain, not of regret, but of triumph. "Thank God, I have done my duty." At 4:30 p.m., as the cannons roar above, Nelson breathes his last. The admiral is gone, but his victory will echo forever. Nelson has died, but the Battle of Trafalgar is not yet over. The Franco-Spanish fleet is collapsing, but the storm of aftermath is still to come. Victory and aftermath. The guns fall silent. Smoke lifts slowly into the cold October air. The sea, once alive with fire and thunder, now lies heavy with silence broken only by the cries of the wounded and the groaning timbers of shattered ships. The Battle of Trafalgar is won. Out of 33 French and Spanish ships, 22 lie captured or destroyed. Not a single British ship is lost. The combined fleet that Napoleon hoped would dominate the Channel is shattered beyond repair. The invasion of Britain, the nightmare that loomed over London for years, is no longer possible. But victory has come at a terrible cost. On board HMS Victory, the news spreads like a shadow. Admiral Nelson is dead. Sailors weep openly. Hardened gunners who moments before roared like lions now sit in silence, their faces blackened with powder and streaked with tears. Even captured French officers, hearing of Nelson's fall, bow their heads in respect. For they know they have lost not just to Britain, but to the greatest naval commander of their age. Yet there is no time for grief. The storm comes. The very night of the battle, a violent gale lashes the wreck-strewn waters of Cape Trafalgar. Damaged ships, some dismasted, others half-sunk, are tossed about like toys in the raging sea. British crews fight desperately to save their prizes, the captured enemy ships, but the storm claims many. More lives are lost to wind and wave than to shot and shell. Still Collingwood, now in command, steadies the fleet. Though he grieves his fallen friend, he knows Nelson's vision must be carried forward. "We must anchor England's glory on this day," he declares, holding the line. As dawn breaks over the Atlantic, the scope of the victory becomes clear. Napoleon's grand strategy has failed. His fleets are broken. Britain's navy now rules the waves unchallenged for more than a century to come. But Trafalgar is more than a battle. It is a myth born in fire. Nelson's name becomes eternal. In villages across England, church bells toll. In London, crowds gather in silence, waiting for the official word. And when it comes, grief and pride mix into something immortal. The admiral who gave his life has secured not just a victory, but the very survival of his nation. His body, preserved in a cask of brandy for the voyage home, returns to England draped in flags, received like a fallen king. His funeral at St. Paul's Cathedral draws thousands, sailors, nobles, commoners alike, all united by the sense that they have witnessed the passing of a legend. Trafalgar becomes more than a battle. It becomes a symbol that a single man with vision, courage, and unshakable will can change the fate of the world. Epilogue: The legacy of Trafalgar. Nelson's tactics are still studied in naval academies to this day. His bold decision to break the line, to ignore convention, to trust in daring rather than caution, proved decisive. But beyond strategy, Nelson left something greater, a story of sacrifice. He knew he might not live to see the victory, and yet he embraced it. "Thank God, I have done my duty." That sentence, whispered with his final breath, became the heartbeat of the Royal Navy for generations. And so Trafalgar endures, not just as a moment of history, but as a lesson. That courage in the face of death, vision in the face of chaos, and faith in one's duty can echo across centuries. The guns of Trafalgar are long silent, but the echoes remain. Nelson's victory secured Britain's place upon the seas, reshaped the course of empires, and etched his name forever in stone. Trafalgar was not just a battle. It was a turning point in history and the last breath of a man who chose duty above life itself.